4. The Transfiguration. The relationship between Jesus and Moses is stressed by the Gospels. Like Moses, Jesus gives the law from the mountain. Moses mediated between God and Israel, setting forth therein the function of the greater Moses. The prophecy concerning the Messiah was that he would be like Moses, Deuteronomy 18:18-19. Even as Moses led God's people from captivity to freedom, so the greater Moses would lead God's covenant race. The comparison made between Moses and Christ is especially clear in the accounts of the Transfiguration. Matthew 17:1-9, Mark 9:2-10, Luke 9:28-36. At several points the comparison is marked. First of all, the incident occurred on a mount. Most commentators are concerned with identifying the mountain rather than analyzing the significance of a mountain retreat. Privacy in other places would also have been possible. Clearly, the choice of a mountain invited comparison with Moses, and Jesus self-consciously fulfilled the prophecy implicit in the typology. Even as Moses went up into the mountain after the first disastrous episode to return with renewed tables of law and himself transfigured, so Jesus ascended the mountain. He had already given the law from the mountain, that is, his confirmation of the law in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, like Moses, he was to be transfigured. The transfigured Moses gave the directions for building the tabernacle. The transfigured Christ, as the true tabernacling presence of God, fulfilled all that the sacrifices of the old tabernacle typified. The fact that the disciples tended to expect the literal restoration of Israel's political power was confirmed by the Transfiguration event. In the framework of their insistent expectations, the Transfiguration seemed to confirm their hope. Second, Jesus was transfigured before them. Matthew tells us that his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light, Matthew 17:2. Mark states that his raiment became shining, exceeding white as snow, so as no fuller on earth can white them, Mark 9:3. And Luke states that the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glistening, Luke 9:29. The transfiguration of Moses is thus repeated and surpassed. And it came to pass, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come nigh him. Exodus 34:29-30. And till Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But when Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off, until he came out. And he came out, and spake unto the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone. And Moses put the veil upon his face again, until he went in to speak with him. Exodus 34:33-35. The experience of Moses is repeated on the Mount to point to Jesus as the greater Moses. Third, and there appeared unto him Isaiah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus, Mark 9:4. In their persons, the law and the prophets witnessed to the great lawgiver and the supreme prophet. Quote, there was, it was obvious, a singular fitness in each case. One was the great representative of the law, which was a schoolmaster or servant tutor leading men to Christ. The other, of the whole goodly fellowship of the prophets. Of one it had been said that a prophet like unto him should come in the latter days, Deuteronomy 18:18, to whom men should hearken. Of the other, that he should come again to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, Malachi 4:6. The close of the ministry of each was not after the common death of all men. No man knew the sepulchre of Moses, Deuteronomy 34:6, and Elijah had passed away in the chariots and horses of fire, 2 Kings 2:11. Both were associated in men's minds with the glory of the kingdom of the Christ. The Jerusalem Targum on Exodus 13 connects the coming of Moses with that of the Messiah. Another Jewish tradition predicts his appearance with that of Elijah. Their presence now was an attestation that their work was over and that the Christ had come. End quote. Rather than witnessing, however, that their work was over, of which the text gives no hint, the presence of Moses and Elijah with Jesus attests to their unity. Their work and ministry was one word and one ministry. No division can be made between Jesus and the law and the prophets. Moses and Elijah appeared in glory, Luke 9:31, and Jesus himself was transfigured and glorified, so that the three reveal together the glory of God. Fourth, they spake of his decease which he should accomplish at Jerusalem, Luke 9:31. Literally, the decease or departure of him. The word translated as decease is in Greek exodon, our English word exodus. Luke's choice of word was not accidental. Moses led the people of God in their exodus from Egypt. Elijah witnessed to their apostasy and thus implicitly to the coming exodus from the land of promise. Now Jesus was to accomplish the true exodus at Jerusalem. By his atoning death and resurrection, Jesus would lead the people of God from the land of bondage into true freedom. Hebrews 4 develops this same point by contrasting Joshua and Jesus as each led God's people into their Sabbath or rest. The emphasis here is on the exodus to be accomplished at Jerusalem, not on the vision itself. Hence, when Peter sought to concentrate on the fact of the vision rather than its call to action in history, his statement was disregarded. Luke 9:33. Nixon has called attention to the extensive use of the Exodus theme in the New Testament. A few of the many events cited are the baptism of Jesus by John, a, quote, sacramental representation of the historical Exodus of Israel, and at the same time, an introduction to the new Exodus of salvation, end quote. The 40 days of temptation in the wilderness, quote, are a miniature of the 40 years which Israel spent in the wilderness. The temptations put to Christ are basically those to which Israel had yielded, end quote. Quote, where they had been dissatisfied with Yahweh's provision of manna, he is tempted to turn stones into bread. Where they put God to the test at Massah, demanding proof of his presence and power, he is tempted to jump from the temple pinnacle to force God to honor his promises. Where they forgot the Lord who had brought them out of Egypt and substituted a molten calf for him, he is tempted to fall down and worship Satan. Christ is shown to meet the temptations not arbitrarily, but deliberately from Moses' summary in Deuteronomy of the history of Israel in the wilderness. If Jesus really was the true representative of God's people, he too must be shown to have had his wilderness journey and endured the test which proved his person, only without sin, end quote. The sending of the 70, Luke 10:1 and following, is also an echo of the Exodus experience, Numbers 11:16 and following. Quote, there is then to be a new conquest of Canaan. Its cities will be destroyed in a day of judgment. Mark 8:12, Matthew 16:4, Matthew 12:39, Luke 7:31 and following, end quote. Fifth, Jesus was thus attested to by the law and the prophets, and by God himself, as the greater Moses. The voice of God out of the cloud, a symbol of God in judgment, declared, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. Matthew 17:5. St. Peter tells us exactly what this meant. For Moses truly said unto the fathers, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren, like unto me. Him shall ye hear in all things whatsoever he shall say unto you. And it shall come to pass that every soul which will not hear that prophet shall be destroyed from among the people. Acts 3:22-23. Moses gave the law. Those who refused to hear him refused to submit to the law of God. They revealed their unregenerate nature thereby. Jesus is like unto Moses. He is the great and ultimate lawgiver incarnate. To listen to him is to listen to all the law and the prophets, and much more. To reject him is to deny the law and the prophets as well as his person. Every person who fails to hear him should be, quote, destroyed from among the people, end quote. In Deuteronomy 18:19, which Peter quoted, the text reads, I will require it of him. The threat or promise of destruction appears in Exodus 12:15 and 19, Leviticus 17:4 and 9, etc. The ultimate meaning of cutting off is required here and is applied by Peter because to disobey the law word of Jesus Christ is to be a radically lawless person. God's hear ye him did not call for hearing Jesus as against Moses and Elijah, for they appear in glorified unity with him. The command to hear Jesus is to hear the Christ, whose word is the totality of Scripture, as against the scribes and the Pharisees, the leaders of the people. They are to hear Jesus Christ, which means hearing Moses and Elijah, as against the powers of this world and as against its philosophers and religious leaders. They are to hear Jesus rather than the men of a, quote, faithless and perverse generation, Luke 9:41. It is blasphemy, therefore, to separate the law from Jesus Christ. The fact that this is being done is an evidence of religious decline and collapse. As evidence of this fact, witness a letter from a first-year student at a prominent seminary which prides itself on its quote-unquote orthodoxy. Quote, Dr. W. put the whole discussion of abortion in the purely academic sphere when he divorced morality from society by saying that since this is a democracy, the state would have to base its decision concerning abortion laws on the will of the majority of the people. If they think abortion is harmful to society, they ought to prohibit it. If not, then let her rip. His antinomianism is appalling. I suppose that is the thing I find most troubling here, more in students than professors, but in the latter to some extent, the antinomianism, the old I never mix religion and politics line. It is so bad among some of the folks that when I was trying to discuss God's law in politics and society with one of the students here in the first week I was here, he said that the trouble with me was that I was tight-assed. Now, I've associated a lot of things with desiring to keep God's law, but never that. One thing that disturbed me about that abortion thing was that it was more or less assumed by all there, even those who opposed general abortion, that quote-unquote therapeutic abortion was morally justifiable. If you were trying to save the mother, murder is justified. So murder, of anyone, for a quote-unquote good cause is okay. It is hard to see why they can't see the fallacy of that. Murder is murder, end quote. From a letter of October 17, 1970. With respect to cases where supposedly the doctor must choose between the life of the mother or the life of the baby, I have been unable to find doctors who can cite any such cases. I cannot believe God ever puts any man in a situation where he must play God. The whole matter of therapeutic abortions is an attempt to create situations where man must play God. Such a position is anti-biblical and anti-Christian, as all antinomianism inescapably is. Salvation is by the grace of God through faith. Sanctification is by the law of God. Those outside of grace feel the law as an indictment. It is a death sentence against them. Those who are in the covenant are in a covenant of grace, which is also a covenant of works. The grace enables them to perform the works which are required of them. The warfare of Jesus was not against Moses. It was against the scribes and Pharisees who perverted Moses. It is a perversion of Scripture to separate the law and the prophets from Jesus. The Mount of Transfiguration witnessed to their unity. Folks has rightly pointed to the covenant and the law as a unity, the covenant as the principle of prediction and also the basis of prayer. Quote, It is significant also that for Israel the law is not just a statement of abstract principles, a carefully worked-out code of behavior formulated as such. The law is the expression of the righteousness and mercy of God. It is the statement of the principles of the covenant. The Old Testament setting of the law is the giving of the covenant at the Exodus. The Decalogue begins, I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. The law, therefore, contains not just a code for Israel to keep, but the principles of God's actions in the past, which remain the same for the present and the future. End quote. Antinomianism has furthered the development of a humanistic law, and humanistic law has stimulated the growth of antinomianism. When men have seen humanistic law assume a messianic character and at the same time dissolve the foundations of society, it has been easy for them to develop a theological hostility to law. In Scripture, however, the law is proclaimed to the elect people, to the covenant of grace, and the opening sentence of the law, as Folks noted, celebrates that grace.